So why does it matter how much sugar we eat? Well, half the adult American population has prediabetes or diabetes. 70% is overweight or obese. 1 in 2 Americans has a chronic disease. 1 in 4 die from heart disease each year. And the #1 single leading predictable cause of chronic disease and premature death is our diet. The food you're putting on your fork will impact your health, our healthcare system, our economy, and our environment, even more than COVID-19 in the next decade, unless we make some changes. So clearly, the standard American diet, or SAD, as I like to call it, is high in processed foods and added sugars, and it has contributed to these staggering statistics. Research has shown that added sugar contributes to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, inflammation, infertility, depression, cancer, dementia, and Alzheimer's. So how much sugar do we eat each year? Well, in 1800, the average American ate 1 teaspoon a day. In 1915, the average American ate 5 teaspoons per day. And now we currently average between 17 and 46 teaspoons per day. Wow. So keep in mind, 100 years ago, you'd have had to jump on your horse, ride into town to get a few sugar cubes, take it home, and make it into a sweet treat. Whereas now, without even lifting a finger, you can DoorDash yourself a Dr. Pepper and a dessert and have it delivered straight to your door within minutes. So makes it a little bit easier to get a hold of these days, wouldn't you say? While added sugar is tasty, there's actually no required amount for living. So the American Heart Association recommends less than 9 teaspoons a day for men and 6 for women. And I love Dr. Hyman's research. He says sugar is the most widely abused recreational drug in America. It is 8 times more addictive than cocaine. That is shocking. And he's the world's leading functional medicine doctor, right here in Ohio, actually, at the Cleveland Clinic. Where does most of this added sugar come from? Okay, there we go. The #1 source is sugar-sweetened beverages like sodas, sweet teas, and sugar waters. The second biggest source is snacks and sweets. Like I tell my patients, be really mindful of the 6 C's: cakes, cookies, candies, cereal, cracker, and chips. Sugar is sneaky, and it shows up in a lot of different aliases. Would you ever look at the word dextran on a label and think, oh, that's sugar? Probably not. How about muscovado or treacle? So take a look. There are all kinds of words that you might not have even realized meant sugar. In 2020, the FDA changed the food label and added a new line under total carbohydrates that's called added sugars. It's the red one circled down there. So this is wonderful because now we can differentiate between which ones are naturally occurring in foods and which ones have been added. We'll talk more about this later. So the added sugars include those words that we just saw, those 50 different names like high fructose corn syrup, sucrose, muscovado, and all of those names. But I want to talk for a minute about high fructose corn syrup. Did you ever wonder why 90% of the processed foods in the store contain high fructose corn syrup? Well, I'm going to give you a little history lesson now. High fructose corn syrup was first created in America in 1957 in a lab by rearranging the chemical structure of the glucose enzyme due to rising cane sugar costs. By 1977, the US government placed tariffs on cane sugar, but it subsidized corn production by paying those growers. So as a result, The US and Canadian prices of cane sugar went up double and than the net global average, while corn syrup price dropped significantly. So because of that, food manufacturers, of course, started jumping on that bandwagon and began using high fructose corn syrup to replace table sugar. And just as a side note, personally, I have to wonder if this rise in corn syrup in conjunction with a version of Roundup being sprayed on our crops could be a pivotal piece as to why we've had such a rise in food allergies and intolerances over the last 30 years. Could it be that our bodies were just not created to consume so much corn? I have to wonder. And not only that, high fructose corn syrup is higher in calories than table sugar. So in case I haven't quite yet convinced you of the detrimental effects of added sugar, this study from UCLA actually found that rats, after 6 weeks on a high fructose diet, couldn't even remember to get through the maze that they had done every day. So the conclusion was that a high sugar diet contributes to dementia. The good news was that this was actually reversed when the rats were given high foods and omega fatty acids. And that is foods like olive oil, salmon, walnuts, avocado, all those neuro-enhancing foods. So I found that really interesting. So what a surprise that the decisions about what is in our food are often made in the political arena. So just to kind of mention here, all the sugars, all the sugar alternatives, and sugar substitutes that I'll talk about today have all been declared by our government to be generally recognized as safe, or it's called GRAS. However, keep in mind that processed convenience foods are a big industry, and they have big money to send to lobbyists who influence our government's laws that regulate the production and distribution and marketing of food. So we often have to look at, are they more concerned with, is the big food industry more concerned with profits or the consumer's well-being? Okay. So far we've talked about the different names of sugar, where it's found in foods, and some diseases that it causes. So now I want to shift a minute to what is going on inside of our bodies when we consume added sugars. So a quick science lesson here is that when you eat a carbohydrate, it causes a rapid rise in blood sugar levels and your energy. You know that, right? But then your blood sugar drops suddenly or crashes, leaving you feeling lifeless. This is that red line picture on the screen. So that rise might give you a quick sugar high, but the fall does not feel good. And I like to refer to this example as your blood sugars riding the Magnum roller coaster, or whatever the newest, fastest, highest roller coaster is at Cedar Point. Now, if you eat a protein or a fat along with that carbohydrate, your blood sugars rise slowly and fall slowly. So things like fiber, fat, and protein all slow down that digestion and absorption of carbs. So regardless of whether you're diabetic or not, you feel better when your blood sugar does this. So that's that orange line on the screen above. So I call this your blood sugars riding the sugar, or the kiddie roller coaster, because they're rising slowly and they're falling slowly. And so you feel better. So in order to understand how to pair macronutrients, first we need to know what macronutrients are and where they're found. So the three macronutrients found in foods are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Oops, let me go back one slide. So the first macronutrient we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. They're the current bad guy in the media, right? Keto diet gurus say, just limit your carbs and you'll lose weight. Unfortunately, as a dietitian, I see the fallout of keto, and that is high triglycerides and high cholesterol from all the cheese and bacon. So for a quick chemistry throwback, we classify carbohydrates as either simple or complex, meaning they have one or more than one molecule of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So what are the first foods you think of when you hear the word carbohydrate? We usually think of pasta, cereal, grains, and starches, right? But we also get carbohydrates from vegetables, fruits, dairy, and beans and legumes. So not all carbs are created equal. There are two different types. There are simple sugars and complex carbohydrates. So to talk about simple sugars, we have naturally occurring sugars, those found in fruit and milk and honey, and we have added sugar, sucrose, otherwise known as white table sugar. So when we're talking about detoxing or watching your sugar intake, what I'm referring to is the added sugars, not fruit and milk. Interestingly, research shows that the naturally occurring sugars do not have the same effect on our blood sugars as those added sugars. They don't cause that big spike like you saw in the picture earlier. So what does this tell us? Added sugars are the big problem. They contribute to all the diseases that we talked about at the beginning. Remember the movie Elf? A lot of you guys probably just watched it last month. Think about the Elf diet. If Elf ate it, it's probably not the best choice. It's probably full of added sugar. So, like I already mentioned, the problem is that they cause that spike. They have little to no fiber or nutrients. And often your poor fats and white flour are added to these products. So you get what I call the deadly trinity: added sugar, refined flour, and unhealthy fats. These are in things like donuts, cakes, cookies, candy, ice cream, even some cereals and crackers. The second type of carbohydrates are complex carbohydrates. These are your whole grains, your oatmeals, your whole grain pasta, your beans, and your vegetables. These provide your body with that instant energy, the benefits of carbs, but also they're a great source of fiber. So if you were to embark on a sugar detox in the next few weeks, if you wanted, you could also cut out those white refined flours, just because they do that same thing to your blood sugar. They cause that rise and sudden spike. Another side note here is that even if you're gluten-free, you want to choose those brown rice pastas and whole grain breads versus the corn-based pastas, because the brown rice have higher fiber, which again slows down that blood sugar spike. If we look down under that total carbohydrate on the added sugar line, like I mentioned earlier, that's the number we're most concerned with. So I want to talk about yogurt for a second, because yogurt is a perfect example. Some yogurts have all naturally occurring sugars, and some yogurts have added sugar in addition to the naturally occurring. I mean, you practically need a nutrition degree to go through the yogurt aisle anymore, don't you? There's so many different types of yogurt, and it can be really confusing. So then this is easy now that we have that new line on the label of added sugars. All you have to do, check the yogurt, see how many grams of added sugar it has in it, because that's the most concerning. Some other surprising examples of where added sugars are found: Cliff bars, which are one of the healthier protein bars, 5 teaspoons of added sugar. A 12-ounce Coke, 10 teaspoons of added sugar. When I teach this to kids, I have them literally scoop out 10 teaspoons of added sugar. And a Starbucks Grande Frappuccino, because we can drink a lot of sugar. 14 teaspoons of added sugar. That is a lot. So I want to talk about artificial sweeteners as well, because sometimes people will trade the added sugar for artificial sweeteners. So let's just touch on those a minute. You might have heard of some of these. Aspartame, Equal, Sweet and Low, acesulfame potassium is a new common one. Some of these artificial sweeteners are actually 200 to 600 times sweeter than table sugar. So when my patients ask, is it okay to drink, a liter of diet soda a day? I mean, would these exacerbate your sugar cravings? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see that all the time. The other thing that I want to touch on is sugar alcohols, because sometimes, again, they'll take out regular sugar and put in sugar alcohols in products instead. So anything that ends with OL, xylitol, sorbitol, mannitol, those are all sugar alcohols. So as a general rule, if the item has less than 5 grams per serving, it won't affect your blood sugar level. And a lot of times sugar alcohols are used in those diabetic items, diabetic candies, those kind of things. If it has more than 5 grams per serving, just so you know, in some people, it does cause a little bit of diarrhea and bloating. So what are your best choices of sweeteners? Well, if you decide to do a sugar detox, when you're adding them back in after your 10 or 20 or 30 days, however long you're going to try to decrease inflammation or whatever your end goal is, these are your best choices. So maybe it would be a great time to trial some of those alternatives like honey or maple syrup in your baking instead of using white table sugar. Just as a side note here, if you do use honey or maple syrup and the recipe calls for, say, 1 cup of sugar, you would want to drop that down to 3/4 cup of the maple syrup or honey because it's a liquid. And so it's going to make your product a little bit different consistency if you do try some of those. I personally prefer the plant-based alternatives like the stevia or Truvia as coffee sweetener. And remember, a small amount of table sugar is perfectly fine in moderation. And kind of as a maintenance rule, what I advocate with my patients is what I call an 85-15 plan. And what that means is 85% of the time you're making best choices. And so that allows for that 15% of time to have a sweet treat if you'd like. And I had one patient come back and say, I did that math, Heather, and that came out to 2 times a week. And I said, perfect, try that. Once or twice a week, have regular sugar in moderation. Have a cookie or a piece of cake, because otherwise what you're doing is setting yourself up for more of a extreme view or a restrict, and then you're going to get tired of that lifestyle and go, I'm done. I'm eating all the sugar I can, and then end up with a sugar binge. So my goal is to find something with my patients that's sustainable for them long term. All right, so if you have been convinced that added sugar is a problem for you today, and you want to try cutting it out, here's where I would start. Cold turkey, cut it all out, added sugar for 10 days. You may go through a bit of withdrawal. I'm just warning you now. But I promise you that once you've gotten to the end of 10 days, you will crave it less. I have seen it over and over personally and professionally. That includes table sugar and artificial sweeteners for 10 days. Check your drinks. look at those drinks. Are there sugars hiding in there? And then combine your carbohydrates whenever you eat a carb, a fruit, vegetable, or a whole grain, with a protein or a fat to balance that blood sugar better. And then practice some healthy strategies. A lot of times people look to sugar kind of as a decompress. I see this as a weight management dietitian all the time, kind of as an autopilot or something that they look forward to each night in the evening. And so kind of come up with some other alternatives to sitting down with a sugary treat every night of the week. And then remember to get a good night's sleep, because when you don't get enough sleep, that alters your body's hormone levels, which then create hunger hormone cycles to increase. So today we've learned about where added sugars are found in foods, what names they go by, and what they do in our bodies. So not only will a sugar detox help you balance your blood sugars, increase your energy, and meet your weight loss goals if you are looking for that, but it will also lead to improved overall health and well-being. And those are sweet rewards.